Imagine walking into your daughter's in-laws' mansion 2 hours late, grease still on your shirt, holding nothing more than a modest picture frame. That was me. And in front of all their guests, they sneered, told me I wasn't even fit to sit at their table. My daughter cried, humiliated for me. I was ready to walk out when the doorbell rang. And the moment that guest stepped inside, everything changed. The Saturday started the way most of mine do these days. Quiet. Too quiet sometimes. I sat at my small kitchen table with the morning paper spread out in front of me, the sports section folded back where my wife Linda used to peek at the crossword. 3 years since cancer took her, and I still set her mug across from mine. I keep telling myself it is habit, but deep down I know it is something else. It is the memory of what my mornings used to feel like. Warm, shared, alive. The coffee in my chipped blue cup had gone lukewarm while I stared at the print without reading a word. Then the phone rang. That sharp, sudden sound that makes your chest jump. Who even calls at 10 on a Saturday anymore? I figured maybe Emily, my daughter, or one of the few old buddies who still checks in. But when I lifted the receiver and heard the voice, my heart sank. Frank, it's Nathan. Nathan Hale, my son-in-law, never called me. If there was something to be said, it always went through Emily, his wife, my girl. His voice had that tight politeness that never fooled me. It was the sound of a man doing something he did not want to do. He cleared his throat. Emily insists I call. It's my mother's birthday tonight. She wants you there. The way he said insist told me plenty. It wasn't his idea. Probably not Veronica's either. Veronica Hale, his mother, had made it clear years ago what she thought of me. A mechanic. A man who lived in a walk-up with mismatched furniture. Not her kind of people. 7 o'clock. Greenbrier Country Club. Business casual. He let the words hang in the air like a warning. They don't hold reservations. Don't be late. The line went dead before I could answer. I just sat there with the phone pressed against my ear, listening to nothing. Business casual. Standards. His words spun around in my head. I looked down at my faded sweatshirt, the one Linda used to call my Saturday uniform, and I laughed without humor. The closest thing I had to country club clothes was an old navy shirt buried in the back of my closet. I stood up, joints stiff, and walked to the window. Outside, a neighbor's lawnmower buzzed across the grass. Ordinary life. The kind I belonged to. Not crystal chandeliers and valet parking. But Emily would be there. My girl wanted me there. That was enough. For her, I would walk into that lion's den. I remembered the first time I met the Hales. A fancy restaurant in Boston with waiters in press jackets. I had worn my best shirt, the one Linda ironed with such care. Veronica's face had shifted when she heard what I did for a living. How practical, she had said. That pause before practical had cut deeper than any insult. Now, years later, nothing much had changed. They still thought I did not belong, and maybe they were right. But Emily was my daughter, and if she asked me to stand by her side, I would. Even if it meant being measured and found lacking all over again. I sat back down at the table, staring at the paper but seeing none of it. Linda's voice came back to me, soft and steady. You've got nothing to prove but who you are, Frank. Still, I could feel the weight pressing on me. My old Toyota parked outside, my worn wallet on the counter, my hands with scars from years of engines and grease. Everything about me said ordinary, and the Hales worshipped anything but ordinary. I rubbed my thumb against the rim of the mug, chipped and rough. That mug told the truth of my life. Sturdy, useful, not much to look at. And that truth was about to walk into the brightest, coldest room in Brookfield. The clock ticked loud in the stillness. 6 hours until dinner. 6 hours to figure out how to walk into a world where I was never welcome. I pushed away from the table and went to the closet, pulling the door open. Old shirts lined up like tired soldiers. My eyes landed on that navy blue one. Safe, plain, but it would have to do. I ran my fingers over the fabric, remembering Linda smoothing the wrinkles years ago. I knew the night would not be easy. In fact, I could already feel the storm building. But I also knew something else. I had been through harder things than disapproving looks and whispered insults. I had buried the love of my life and kept moving. That gave me strength they would never understand. I closed the closet door and leaned against it, letting out a long breath. Tonight would test me, no doubt about that. And yet a strange thought came over me. Sometimes the very nights you dread the most end up changing everything. I just didn't know yet what was waiting for me on that road. The mall on a Saturday felt like another world compared to my small apartment. South Shore Plaza was crowded, buzzing with families, teenagers, and couples moving in and out of bright storefronts. The air hit me first, that heavy mix of perfume and coffee drifting from kiosks, making me feel out of place before I even stepped off the escalator. I had one goal, though: find something halfway decent to wear, and a gift that wouldn't embarrass Emily in front of her in-laws. I walked past glass displays filled with shoes I knew I couldn't afford. Every price tag I caught out of the corner of my eye made me tense, but I pushed forward until I found the men's section of a department store. Racks of pressed shirts hung in neat rows. I ran my hand over a few of them, feeling the difference between my worn cotton and the crisp fabric under my fingers. A young clerk approached me, her smile automatic but kind. "Looking for anything special, sir?" "A shirt," I said, clearing my throat, "for a dinner at Greenbrier Country Club." Her eyes flickered in recognition. People around here knew what Greenbrier meant. She nodded. "Something classic. Navy or gray. Can't go wrong." "Oh." I followed her suggestion and pulled a navy shirt from the rack. It looked close to the one in my closet, but newer, less tired. I pictured Linda folding shirts with perfect lines, and for a moment I felt her presence beside me. I checked the price tag. Higher than I liked, but I reminded myself this wasn't about me. It was about Emily. After paying for the shirt, I wandered into the gift section. Rows of glass cases held jewelry and leather goods. I froze there, suddenly unsure. What do you buy for a woman like Veronica Hale, who already had more than she could ever need? My stomach tightened as memories of that first dinner with them came rushing back. We had sat in that Italian restaurant in Boston, waiters gliding by with trays balanced high. Emily had been glowing, proud to introduce me. "My dad fixes cars," she said with a smile. "He can fix anything." Veronica had tilted her head, her lips parting in that slight pause before the word. "How practical." The way she said it turned my pride into shame. Charles shook my hand like it was something he had to endure, then looked past me before I could say a word. That dinner stayed with me like a scar that never quite healed. I blinked back to the present when a sales clerk asked softly, "Who's the gift for?" "My daughter's mother-in-law. It's her birthday." The woman studied me with quick understanding. Something thoughtful but not too personal. She guided me to a shelf of silver picture frames. One in particular caught my eye, elegant without being flashy. The price tag said $68. I thought about the cash in my wallet, about how long it would take me to earn that back doing odd jobs, but I picked it up anyway. "This is a safe choice," she said. Safe. That word stung, but maybe safe was the best I could hope for tonight. I paid for the frame, and the clerk wrapped it neatly in tissue, sliding it into a gift bag with ribbon handles. It looked polished, like something that might belong in their world. As I walked back through the mall, I caught sight of my reflection in a window. A man carrying a gift bag, wearing an old jacket, hair thinning, lines carved into his face. Not the sort of man who blended in at Greenbrier. I told myself again it wasn't about blending in. It was about standing next to Emily, no matter what. On the drive home, the bag rested on the passenger seat, like fragile proof that I was trying. The late afternoon light slanted across the dashboard. My thoughts drifted back to Linda. She would have told me not to worry about Veronica's judgment, that Emily knew who her father really was. But I couldn't shake the nervous energy building in me. I turned down my street and parked outside the building, the Toyota groaning as it settled. I carried the bag upstairs and hung the new shirt neatly, smoothing it with my hand as if Linda had just ironed it. The clock on the wall ticked steady, each second reminding me how close the evening was creeping. I sat down at the kitchen table again, staring at the gift bag across from me. All I could hear was Veronica's voice from years ago, stretched out on that word. Practical. Tonight I would walk into her house again, gift in hand, shirt tucked in, doing my best to hold my head high. But a question gnawed at me as the minutes passed. Was any of this enough? Would anything ever be enough for people who measured worth in money and polish? The only answer I had was Emily's face, the way she had hugged me at that restaurant even when her in-laws dismissed me. That was reason enough to try again. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, and whispered into the empty room, "Linda, give me strength." The ticking clock seemed louder than before, pulling me forward toward a night I already knew would not be easy. And somewhere in my gut I felt the faintest chill that tonight was going to change everything. I left the apartment earlier than I needed to, hoping to calm the knot in my stomach with some extra time. The sun was still high when I merged onto I-95, the steady hum of the Toyota almost comforting. The gift bag sat buckled in the passenger seat, the tissue paper trembling slightly with each bump. I kept glancing at it like it was a fragile passenger, the proof that I was doing everything I could for Emily. Traffic moved smooth, not heavy for a Saturday afternoon. I set the cruise control and tried to let my mind drift, but it circled the same thoughts over and over. Veronica's look when she first saw me, Charles's limp handshake. Nathan's voice clipped with politeness that was really a blade. I gripped the wheel tighter, telling myself I would stand tall anyway. Then I saw the flash of hazard lights ahead. A silver Jaguar sat pulled off on the shoulder, hood up, steam curling into the May sky. Cars whipped by at 70 miles an hour, drivers craning their necks to look but not slowing down. My instincts kicked in before my mind caught up. Decades of pulling over for strangers, for neighbors, for anyone broken down. My hands moved to the blinker, almost on their own. I eased off the cruise control and guided my Toyota behind the Jag. My car looked small and tired compared to the polished metal in front of me. A woman stood near the guardrail, one hand shielding her eyes from the sun, the other clutching her blazer closed against the wind. I stepped out slowly, the roar of traffic slamming into me like a wall. I kept my hands visible, not wanting to startle her. "Car trouble?" I called over the noise. She turned, studying me carefully before answering. "The engine just died. All the warning lights came on at once." Her voice carried authority, each word clipped and clear. She looked to be in her early 60s, silver hair styled neat, her presence polished even here on the side of the highway. I nodded, staying a few steps back. "I'm Frank Miller, used to work on cars for a living." "Mind if I take a look?" There was a pause, the kind where you can almost hear the wheels turning in someone's head. Stranger, middle of the highway. She had to weigh trust against need. Finally, she stepped aside and extended her hand. "Margaret Lawson, I'd appreciate any insight." Her handshake was firm, no nonsense, the kind you remember. I walked to the open hood, already smelling coolant and oil. The engine bay told a story right away. Belt frayed and hanging, coolant splattered like paint, pulley wobbling on its shaft. "Water pump failed," I said, straightening up. "Took the belt with it. Good news is I can probably get you running again. Bad news is it'll take time." She glanced at her watch, a slim gold piece that caught the light. Her face showed a flicker of frustration before smoothing back into composure. "How much time?" "An hour and a half. Maybe 2. Unless you'd rather call a tow truck and wait until Monday for parts." She looked down the empty stretch of road, then back at me. "If you're willing to try, I'd be grateful." I gave a small nod and went to the trunk of my Toyota. My emergency kit had followed me everywhere for years. Wrenches, jumper cables, duct tape, even a rebuilt alternator I had picked up at a junkyard. 40 years of turning wrenches taught me that being prepared meant helping yourself and sometimes helping someone else. As I returned with the tools, I caught Margaret's eyes on my car. The contrast wasn't lost on either of us. My 10-year-old Toyota with chipped paint, her luxury Jaguar gleaming even in distress. Stay on the safe side, I told her. Traffic doesn't forgive mistakes out here. She moved closer to the guardrail while I leaned into the engine bay, sleeves rolled up. My fingers found bolts and wires like they always had, memory guiding me through. Grease worked into my skin within minutes, the smell of coolant thick in the air. "You're missing your Saturday afternoon for this," she said over the wind. I tightened a stubborn bolt, grunting. Had somewhere to be myself. Family dinner, birthday party. Her expression shifted. "I hope this doesn't make you late." "We'll see." The bolt gave way with a metallic snap. I wiped my forehead with the back of my hand. "Where were you headed?" "Birthday celebration, too," she said, almost with a hint of irony. I chuckled low. Small world. The work pulled me into its rhythm. Remove, adjust, improvise, repeat. Time lost its edge, while I focused on the engine's story. Margaret stood nearby, arms crossed, watching not with impatience but with genuine interest. The traffic roared on, the sun dipping a little lower, shadows stretching across the shoulder. My shirt darkened with sweat and grime, hands black with oil, but I felt alive in the way only work you know by heart can make you feel. Margaret's voice carried over the rush of cars. "How long have you been doing this?" "Since I was 16, I said, checking the tension on a belt. 46 years, give or take. That's impressive. Most people would just call roadside assistance." "Most people don't know how to fix what breaks," I answered without looking up. Her silence told me she was thinking about more than cars. I could feel her gaze, steady, thoughtful. I tightened the last connection and leaned back, wiping my hands on an old rag. "Good news is I think I can get you back on the road. Bad news is I'll be late for that dinner." She gave me a small smile, the first I had seen on her face. Sometimes being late is worth it. I glanced at the sun sinking toward the horizon, the minutes slipping through my fingers like sand. A strange feeling stirred in my chest, though I couldn't quite name it. All I knew was that I had chosen to stop, and that choice was already pulling me towards something I didn't yet understand. My hands were already dark with grime as I leaned deeper over the engine bay. The traffic roared past only a few feet away, each blast of wind pushing against my back. I blocked it out the way I had for decades, focusing only on bolts and belts, the way metal talks when it is worn down. Margaret stayed by the guardrail, her blazer pulled tight, watching every move with sharp eyes. She didn't fidget or sigh the way some people do when they are waiting. She watched with the kind of attention that made me feel she wanted to understand. I pulled the shredded belt free and set it on the fender. "There's the problem," I called over the noise. Water pump seized and took the belt with it. She stepped closer, careful to stay clear of the traffic side. Her eyes fell on the mangled rubber, so that tiny piece brought the whole car to a stop. I nodded. That's how it usually goes. One part fails, and the rest follows. You either fix it right, or you're stranded. Her expression softened a little. "Sounds like life." I gave a short laugh. "Yeah, pretty much." I grabbed the rebuilt alternator from my trunk. Most people would think it's strange to carry something like that around, but I had a habit of keeping spare parts. Nights get long when you live alone, and I'd rather rebuild something than stare at the television. I set it in place, my fingers working by memory. Margaret tilted her head, her silver hair catching the fading sunlight. "Do you always carry those kinds of parts with you?" "Picked this one up at a junkyard last month, cleaned it up. You never know when you'll need it. Most people would just call roadside assistance." Most people don't know how to fix what breaks," I said again, feeling the words heavier this time. She smiled faintly. "My husband used to say something like that. Different field, but same idea. He believed people should be able to stand on their own 2 feet. I looked up, surprised by the way she said "used to." "I'm sorry, he passed?" Her eyes flickered, but she held them steady on me. 5 years ago. Cancer." I froze for a second, the wrench slipping slightly in my hand. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "I lost my wife to the same thing, 3 years back." For a moment the sounds of the highway faded, It was just the two of us standing on that narrow strip of concrete, carrying losses that still felt raw no matter how many years had passed. She folded her arms tighter, and I could see the weight in her shoulders. I wiped my hands on a rag, smearing the grease, but not really cleaning it, and nodded slowly. "It changes everything," she said, almost to herself. "Yeah," I answered. "It does. You start looking at time different. You start thinking about what really matters and what doesn't." Her eyes softened then in a way that went beyond politeness. "And what have you decided matters, Frank?" I tightened the last bolt and leaned back, considering her question. Being there when someone needs you, even if it makes you late. She let out a quiet breath, not quite a laugh, but not sorrow either. Something in between. "That's rare these days." The alternator settled into place with a satisfying click. I checked the tension on the makeshift belt path and gave it a tug. My hands moved sure and steady, but my mind kept circling back to Linda. How many nights had she sat at the kitchen table waiting for me, grease still on my arms, never once complaining. She understood what it meant to help someone, even when it cost you. I felt that same steadiness now as Margaret watched me work. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky orange and gold. My shirt clung to my back with sweat, the smell of coolant sharp in the air. But the work calmed me. It always had. 46 years, I said finally, more to myself than to her. She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "That's how long I've been doing this. Started at 16, still at it now." "That's impressive," she said, her tone carrying no hint of condescension, only respect. I tightened the last clamp and wiped my brow. "Cars keep you honest. They don't care who you are, where you live, how much money you make. Either you fix them right, or they leave you stranded." Her gaze lingered on me, thoughtful. People could learn something from that. I stepped back, rag in hand, and looked at the engine. Almost done. Just one more connection before I could test it. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard and saw the time slipping away. Dinner at Greenbrier moving closer with every passing minute. Margaret must have noticed my expression. "You're running late because of me." I shrugged, forcing a small smile. "Sometimes being late is worth it." Her eyes held mine for a moment, serious and calm, and I felt a strange warmth stir in my chest. I turned back to the engine, tightening the last bolt with deliberate care. I didn't know it then, but every second I spent on that shoulder was pushing me closer to a night I would never forget. I twisted the key in the ignition, and the Jaguar came alive as if it had never failed. The engine purred steady, the dashboard lights glowed green, and the sound was clean enough to make me smile despite the grease on my face. Margaret leaned in, listening closely, and then let out a quiet sigh of relief. "That sounds completely different," she said. "Should carry you another 100,000 miles at least," I answered, stepping back and wiping my hands on the rag that was already more black than cloth. She reached into her purse and pulled out a wallet. It was leather, neat and slim, the kind that probably cost more than my monthly groceries. "How much do I owe you?" she asked. "Nothing." Her brows knit, as if I had spoken in a foreign language. "You gave up your whole afternoon, used your own equipment, even a part. Please, at least let me cover the cost." I shook my head. $15 at a junkyard. I've got more sitting in boxes at home. I don't take money for helping." She hesitated, her hand still on the wallet, then slowly slid it back into her bag. "That doesn't feel right." "Trust me, it's fine. Someone once helped me when I needed it. I've been paying it forward ever since." Her eyes softened, and she studied me like she was trying to see the measure of a man she'd just met. Finally, she reached into her purse again, but this time she pulled out her phone. "Then at least give me your number. I don't meet people like you very often. I'd like to stay in touch." I was surprised at how quickly I nodded. I read my number while she tapped it in. A moment later, my old phone buzzed with a call from her. Classical music chimed from her end when I answered. "Now you're in my phone," she said with a smile. "Guess that makes it official," I replied. We shook hands again, her grip firm, her eyes bright. For a moment neither of us moved, and then she stepped back toward the Jaguar. I really should get moving. I'm already terribly late. That word hit me like cold water. Late. My stomach clenched as I glanced at the dashboard clock in my Toyota. I had been so focused on the repair I hadn't noticed the hours slipping away. The green digits told me what I didn't want to see. The birthday dinner was already underway. I forced a calm tone. Yeah, me too. She tilted her head. Where are you headed? Dinner. Family thing. Not my usual crowd. Her lips curved faintly. Same here. She slid into the driver's seat, adjusted the mirrors, then rolled down the window. Drive safely, Frank, and thank you again, truly. Safe travels, I said, and call me if that car gives you any more trouble. Her smile lingered a moment longer before she pulled onto the highway, the Jaguar merging into traffic with ease. I stood there watching her taillights disappear until they were swallowed by the flow of cars. Then I turned back to my own car, the Toyota that had carried me faithfully through decades of ordinary days. The gift bag waited on the passenger seat, the ribbon handles now wilted from the heat. I sat behind the wheel and started the engine, the familiar rumble greeting me like an old friend. For a moment I just sat there, staring at the clock. I could feel the weight of choice pressing down. I could drive straight home, shower, change again, maybe call Emily with some excuse. Or I could head to Greenbrier as I was, 2 hours late, shirt stained with sweat and grease, carrying a gift that suddenly felt far too small for the world I was about to walk into. My hands tightened on the wheel. Emily's face came to mind, her smile when she hugged me, her voice when she said she wanted me there. That was enough. I put the car in drive and eased back into traffic. The highway stretched out before me, golden light fading into dusk. My reflection in the windshield looked tired, lines deeper than usual, but my eyes were steady. I had chosen to stop and help, and now I would live with that choice. The miles ticked by, the minutes slipping faster than I wanted. My stomach twisted with each exit sign I passed. I imagined Veronica's sharp look when I walked in, Charles's sigh, Nathan's smirk. I knew exactly how it would go. They would see me before they heard a word, and their judgment would be sealed. I gripped the wheel tighter and whispered into the empty car. Sometimes being late is worth it. The Toyota hummed, steady as always, carrying me closer to the confrontation I knew was waiting. The gift bag shifted with each turn, as if reminding me of the fragile bridge I carried into enemy territory. By the time the signs for Brookfield appeared, my heart had settled into a heavy rhythm. I wasn't just late. I was walking into their world marked with grease and dust, every second of my choice written across me. The clock had won. I couldn't undo the time. I couldn't change what they would see, but I could walk in with my head high, knowing exactly why I was late. I tightened my grip on the wheel and whispered again, this time steady, for Emily, and I drove on, toward the storm. By the time I pulled into Brookfield, the sun was down, and the streetlights glowed against the manicured lawns. The houses grew larger the closer I came to Greenbrier, each driveway lined with imported cars that looked polished even in the dark. My Toyota felt like it had wandered into the wrong neighborhood, its paint faded and its engine humming like an old song that no one here would recognize. When I turned into the Hale driveway, the house rose in front of me like a monument. 2 stories of brick and stone, windows glowing warm from within, hedges trimmed with precision. The kind of place that makes you think of money before you think of people. Luxury cars filled the curved drive. A valet glanced at my Toyota with thinly veiled surprise, then gestured toward the far edge of the lawn. I parked at the end, half hidden behind a towering SUV that probably cost more than my entire savings. I sat for a moment with the engine off, staring at my reflection in the glass. My navy shirt was streaked faintly with grease, my hands scrubbed but still stained. My hair was mussed from the wind on the highway. I looked nothing like their world, but the gift bag sat upright beside me, and Emily's face came to mind. That was enough. I stepped out, the cool air sharp against my skin. The house loomed taller with each step up the stone path. At the door I pressed the bell, and a clear chime rang out inside. delicate and expensive like everything else about this place. I could hear voices on the other side, laughter and clinking glasses. The door opened to reveal Veronica herself. She wore a gown the color of deep wine, her hair perfectly set, diamonds at her throat. For a moment she froze, her eyes sweeping over me. Surprise. Calculation. Then something colder, almost horror. "Frank," she said finally, the word shaped like a diagnosis. I lifted the bag in both hands. "Happy birthday, Veronica. I'm sorry I'm late." She took the gift with her fingertips as if it might stain. Her eyes flicked to my shirt, then my shoes, then back to my face. "2 hours late," she said softly, her tone sharp enough to cut. "I had to help someone on the road. Their car broke down." "I see," she answered, though the words carried no real belief. She turned her head and called into the house. "Charles, Nathan, your guest has arrived." The pause before guest held enough ice to freeze me where I stood. She stepped aside, and I entered the foyer. Marble floors stretched beneath a chandelier that spilled crystal light across the room. Paintings lined the walls, landscapes in gilded frames that probably cost more than I made in a year. Voices drifted from the living room, low and refined. Charles appeared first, tall, his suit pressed, his face stiff with disapproval. He looked me over with the same expression he might give a cracked window. "There you are," he said, as if I had done something wrong just by showing up. "We were beginning to wonder if you had forgotten." "Something happened on the road," I said evenly. "Someone needed help." Nathan followed, wine glass in hand, every hair in place. He gave a thin smile that never reached his eyes. "Well, at least you made it." Emily was worried. And then she appeared. Emily, in a navy dress that shimmered under the chandelier, her hair pulled back, her eyes full of relief when they met mine. "Dad," she said, rushing forward. She hugged me tight, not caring about the faint grease on my shirt. Her warmth cut through the chill in the room. "I was so worried." "I'm fine, sweetheart," I whispered. "Just got delayed." She smiled through the worry, then glanced at her husband and his parents. The tension in her shoulders told me she felt it too. "Perhaps," Veronica said coolly, "you would like to freshen up. The powder room is just down the hall." "He's fine as he is," Charles cut in, his voice blunt, his eyes hard. No need for theatrics. The air thickened, sharp with judgment. I stood in their marble foyer, my daughter's hand still on my arm, my gift dangling from Veronica's delicate grip, and I knew exactly where I stood in their world. Somewhere below them, always below. The laughter from the living room had faded. Guests sensed something was happening at the front door, their voices lowered, their attention leaning in this direction. I caught a glimpse of polished shoes and cocktail dresses as heads began to turn. I tightened my jaw, my pride standing where my appearance could not. I had come here for Emily, not for them. Whatever storm was about to unfold, I would face it on my feet. And as the murmur of guests grew louder, I felt the weight of every eye preparing to judge me. The night was only beginning. The moment I stepped into the living room, the conversation stopped. It was like someone had shut off a radio mid-song. Crystal glasses froze halfway to lips, polished shoes shifted on the rug, and every pair of eyes turned toward me. I felt the heat of their stares crawl up my neck. The room smelled of wine and roasted meat, expensive perfumes layered over each other until the air itself seemed heavy. I tried to move quietly to an empty chair at the side of the room, but Veronica's voice cut across the silence like a blade. "Oh, I don't think so." "Oh." The words carried over the guests, sharp and clear. I stopped mid-step. My heart thudded once, heavy. "If you cannot dress like a human being," she continued, her voice rising so that no one could pretend not to hear, "then do not sit at the table with human beings." A glass clinked against a plate. Someone drew in a sharp breath. I felt Emily stiffen beside me. "Mom," she said, her voice trembling, "that's my father." Nathan's tone slid in, smooth but cutting. "Your father, who apparently thinks it's acceptable to show up at a formal dinner, looking like he just left a garage. The words hit like stones, each one meant to bruise. I stood still, gripping the back of a chair, trying to steady myself. The faces around me blurred for a moment. Some of the guests looked down at their glasses. Others whispered behind raised hands. A few stared openly, waiting for the spectacle to continue. Charles cleared his throat, the authority in his voice final. Either change into something civilized or go home. We cannot have such a display at our celebration. The word display stung worse than anything else. I wasn't a man to them. I was an object, an eyesore they wanted out of sight. Emily stepped between us, her hand clutching my arm. Please don't do this. He helped someone on the way here. That's why he looks like this. He was being himself. He was being kind. Exactly the problem, Veronica said coldly. Some people don't understand appropriate boundaries. A laugh, short and cruel, rippled from one of the guests, quickly silenced. I looked around the room. I saw eyes that turned away, embarrassed to witness what was happening but unwilling to intervene. I saw my daughter standing small against the weight of her husband's family. And I saw the judgment on faces that had already decided I wasn't worthy of a chair at their table. You know what? I said quietly. My voice was low, but it carried. The silence of the room made sure of that. Emily's eyes widened. Dad, please. Some people don't understand appropriate boundaries, I repeated, meeting Veronica's gaze, then Charles's, then Nathan's. Some people think money makes them better than other human beings. The air in the room shifted. A few guests shifted in their seats, uneasy. Nathan's grip tightened around his wine glass. Charles's jaw locked. Character isn't for sale, I said. Veronica's face flushed red, her hand tightening on the arm of a chair. How dare you speak to us like that in our home? I straightened my shoulders. I dare because someone needs to tell you the truth. You can dress me down in front of your friends. You can call me names, but you don't get to decide my worth. Emily's hand trembled against mine. Dad, I looked at her and softened my voice. Sweetheart, you deserve better than this. Better than people who believe kindness is shameful. Oh, I turned back to Charles, to Veronica, to Nathan. You want me gone? Fine. But remember this moment when you wonder why decent people avoid you. I pulled my keys from my pocket and slipped them into my hand. My chest burned, not from shame, but from the weight of years of judgment finally spilling over. The room stayed frozen, everyone waiting for what would happen next. And then the doorbell rang. A clear chime, polite and delicate, echoing through the house. The sound cut through the tension like a sharp knife. Heads turned toward the foyer. Through the tall window, I caught the glint of headlights and the sleek curve of a silver car pulling into the driveway. My breath caught. I knew that car. The doorbell chimed again, louder this time. All eyes swung from me to the front of the house. The moment of humiliation had cracked open, and something else was about to walk through that door. The door opened before anyone could move. A rush of cool night air slipped into the warm house, and there she was. Margaret Lawson stepped across the threshold with the kind of calm presence that made everyone in the room straighten their backs without thinking. Her silver hair was perfectly set, her navy blazer untouched by the chaos of the highway, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. Her eyes swept the foyer, then the living room, polite but sharp. And then they found me. For the first time that evening, her face lit up. Frank, she said, her voice carrying warmth that filled the entire space. What a wonderful surprise to see you here. The silence in the room grew heavier, though this time it was not focused on me. Heads turned from her to me, and back again. Nathan's wine glass trembled slightly in his hand. Charles blinked as though he had seen a ghost. Veronica's lips parted, her polished mask slipping into something pale and brittle. Margaret crossed the marble floor without hesitation. She looked genuinely glad, not pretending, not polite for the sake of appearances. She reached me and extended her hand, firm and warm. How did the rest of your drive go? She asked. I hope you weren't too late for your family gathering. I held her gaze, a faint smile breaking through despite the sting of the moment before. This is it, I said quietly. This is the gathering. The color drained from Veronica's face. She stumbled a half step, then caught herself. Charles's mouth tightened, and Nathan looked as if his tongue had turned to stone. The guests shifted uncomfortably, realizing something was unfolding that they hadn't expected. Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly, and then she let out a soft laugh, the kind that put everyone else at ease while making the guilty even more uncomfortable. "Well, what are the odds?" she said. She turned toward the room and smiled, her voice smooth but firm. "You all must be Frank's family." Veronica jumped in quickly, her tone suddenly syrupy. "Yes, of course. We were just welcoming him. How wonderful that you know each other." Margaret tilted her head, her smile not fading but her eyes sharp. "Welcoming him," she repeated softly, as though tasting the word. Charles stepped forward with forced cheer. "Mrs. Lawson, we're honored you could join us for Veronica's birthday celebration. Truly honored." Oh, I could see the sweat gathering at his temple, the way his words pressed out too quickly. The truth was plain. They had been desperate for this moment. Desperate for Margaret's approval, for her money, for her influence. Margaret turned back to me, ignoring the tremor in Charles's voice. "This man," she said to the room, her hand resting lightly on my arm, "is the reason I'm standing here tonight. My car broke down on the highway. Frank spent hours getting me back on the road. Refused to take a dime. Can you believe that?" The room stilled. I saw jaws tighten, eyes widen. Rachel, my Emily, let out a quiet breath of relief, her hand pressed to her lips as if she could barely believe the timing. Nathan's voice cracked when he spoke. "Yours?" Margaret nodded cheerfully. "Yes. I was completely stranded until Frank stopped to help. Such kindness from a stranger. You don't find that often these days." The hush in the room was different now. It wasn't just tension. It was exposure. The guests who had witnessed my humiliation a few minutes earlier now understood the weight of their silence. They had watched a man mocked for grease stains without realizing he had earned them by saving the very person the Hales most needed to impress. Palms pressed to wine stems, eyes darted from Veronica to Charles to Nathan. Everyone waited to see how the hosts would spin what had just happened. Veronica tried first, her voice fragile, stretched too thin. "Well, isn't that something?" Margaret smiled again, still warm, but with a glint that made my chest tighten. She wasn't fooled. She had seen everything. She had walked into a house mid-scene and pieced the story together with the skill of someone who had watched people all her life. She turned slowly, her gaze sweeping across the room. "Frank was such a lifesaver," she said again, her voice bright. "I don't know what I would have done without him." The words hung in the air like a verdict. No one moved. I stood a little straighter then, the humiliation of a few minutes earlier easing from my shoulders. Emily caught my eye, her face shining with something I hadn't seen all night hope. The atmosphere had shifted. The Hale family's power in that room was cracking, and everyone knew it. Margaret's hand still rested on my arm. She leaned closer and said softly, "Sometimes the right people show up exactly when you need them." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat was tight. All I knew was that the night had just taken a turn, and none of us would walk away from it unchanged. We moved toward the dining room like actors shuffling onto a stage we didn't want to be on. The mahogany table stretched long under the weight of silver platters and crystal glasses, candles flickering in perfect rows. The birthday cake sat on its stand at the far end, untouched, layers of sugar and cream glowing in the light. I felt every eye on me as Margaret slipped her hand from my arm and took a seat, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "Frank should sit beside me," she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. A ripple moved across the table. Charles hesitated, his jaw working as though the words lodged in his throat. Veronica forced a smile that looked more like pain. "Of course," she managed. "Make yourself comfortable." I slid into the chair at Margaret's side. The linen napkin felt heavy in my lap, the polished silverware lined like soldiers. My calloused hands looked out of place against the fine china. The silence pressed in thick until Margaret spoke again. "I do hope I haven't interrupted anything important," she said, her eyes sweeping the table. The tension was unbearable. Guests glanced nervously at one another, waiting for someone to fill the gap. Finally, Charles lifted his glass and forced a laugh. Not at all. We were simply beginning the celebration. Margaret's eyes flicked toward me, then back to him. Oh? Because when I arrived, it didn't sound much like a celebration. What exactly was being said about Frank? The words landed like stones. Forks froze. A few guests coughed lightly. Veronica reached for her glass, her hand trembling just enough for me to notice. Well, she began, her voice brittle. It was nothing inappropriate. We only suggested that perhaps he might feel more comfortable. What did you say? Margaret cut in, her tone calm but edged like a knife. No one answered. My pulse thudded in my ears. I could feel Emily watching me from across the table, her eyes wide and wet. I cleared my throat. They said I couldn't sit at the table with human beings. My voice was low, but in the silence it carried. Gasps rose around us. One woman set down her fork with a clatter. Another man muttered under his breath but didn't finish the sentence. Margaret leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. Is that true? She asked the hosts, her gaze steady. Veronica's lips parted, then closed again. Charles shifted uncomfortably. Nathan stared at his wine as if it could rescue him. It was taken out of context, Veronica tried. Margaret's smile was cold now. Context doesn't change the meaning. A man spends his afternoon helping a stranger on the side of a highway, arrives late and dirty because of his kindness, and you tell him he isn't fit to sit at your table? The silence deepened. Every guest was listening now, leaning in as though the air itself demanded it. Charles cleared his throat again, sweat beating at his temple. Mrs. Lawson, please understand. We maintain certain standards. Standards, Margaret repeated, rolling the word slowly. Interesting. And yet your so-called standards allowed cruelty to be spoken in this room. Tell me, what exactly do your standards measure? No one answered. The clink of a spoon against porcelain echoed like thunder. Emily's voice broke through, soft but clear. My father is a good man, the best man I know. Her hands were clenched in her lap, her knuckles pale. Margaret turned toward her, her expression softening. I can see that, my dear. She faced the table again, her eyes sweeping over the guests, over Charles, Veronica, Nathan. Character is how you treat people when you believe no one important is watching. Tonight I had the opportunity to watch, and what I saw was telling. The weight of her words filled the room. I felt the sting of humiliation from earlier begin to shift, replaced by something else. Vindication. Not victory, not yet, but the promise that truth was not invisible. Veronica's face was stiff, her diamond necklace rising and falling with each shallow breath. Charles sat frozen, his fork untouched. Nathan's hand trembled against his glass. I sat still, the napkin heavy in my lap, the candlelight glinting off the polished silver. For the first time all night, I wasn't the one under judgment. Margaret folded her napkin neatly and set it beside her plate. Her voice was calm, but it carried the weight of a verdict. I've made my decision about the Hales proposal. The room held its breath. I stared down at my rough hands against the tablecloth and felt the shift in the air. Whatever decision she was about to speak, it would not only change their future, it would change mine too. And I knew in that moment there was no going back. Margaret's voice cut through the silence like a judge handing down a sentence. I will not be moving forward with the Hales proposal. The words hung in the air, heavy as stone. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then I heard the sharp scrape of Charles's chair against the floor as he lurched forward, his face drained of color. Mrs. Lawson, please, he stammered, his voice breaking in a way I had never heard from him before. You must reconsider. This project means everything to us. The jobs it will create, the community it will support, the future of our company. Veronica's hand clutched the edge of the table, her knuckles pale. Surely we can discuss this privately. There must be some misunderstanding. Margaret kept her gaze steady, her posture calm and unshaken. There is no misunderstanding. I evaluate partnerships not only on numbers and projections, but on character. Tonight I've seen enough." The guests sat frozen. Some lowered their eyes to their plates. Others stared openly as though watching a slow collapse of something they had thought unshakable. Emily's hand covered her mouth. Nathan's face had gone blank, but his grip on the stem of his glass was so tight I thought it might snap. Veronica tried again, her voice laced with desperation now. "It was a mistake, words spoken in the heat of the moment. Surely you can't make a decision of this magnitude based on a single evening." "Oh." Margaret's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Character is not revealed in rehearsed speeches or polished presentations. It shows itself in unguarded moments when you think no one is watching. Tonight you showed me exactly who you are. The silence that followed was unbearable. Even the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner seemed louder, like it was counting down the end of something. Charles's face sagged with defeat, but then his voice hardened as if he was trying to salvage authority. "You don't understand. This deal has been months in the making. Our reputation, our standing in the community, everything depends on this." Margaret's tone was cool, final. "Reputation built on cruelty is not worth my investment. Standing built on the humiliation of others is not worth my time." I felt my chest tighten, not from fear, but from the strange mix of justice and disbelief. Only minutes earlier I had been standing in this same room, told I was less than human. Now I was seated at the table while the ones who condemned me squirmed under judgment they couldn't escape. Emily's voice cracked as she whispered across the table. "Dad, do you hear this?" Her eyes glistened with tears, her face a mixture of pride and pain. I nodded slowly, unable to speak. My throat was thick, my hands trembling under the tablecloth. Nathan finally found his voice, his words sharp and bitter. "All of this because of him? Because of a grease-stained mechanic who doesn't belong in this room?" The guests shifted uncomfortably. A few shook their heads. One woman whispered something to the man beside her, and I caught the words, shameful and embarrassing, though I wasn't sure who she meant. Margaret's gaze snapped to Nathan, her eyes like steel. "Because of him," she said firmly. "I arrived here tonight safe and unharmed. Because of him, you are even having this conversation. If you cannot see the value in that, then you understand nothing about worth." Nathan shrank back in his chair, his face red, his mouth clamped shut. I felt Emily's eyes on me again. She reached across the table, her hand brushing mine under the linen. I squeezed back, just enough to let her know I was still steady, still here. The birthday cake sat untouched at the far end of the table, its perfect frosting glowing under the candlelight. It felt like a symbol now, a celebration that would never happen. Margaret folded her napkin and set it down with quiet precision. "I believe that concludes my business here." Charles tried one last plea, his voice cracking. "We can change, Mrs. Lawson. We can prove ourselves." But she was already standing. "Change begins the moment you choose to treat people with dignity. Tonight you chose the opposite. My decision is final." The weight of her words fell heavy over the room. No one moved to stop her. No one dared. I sat still, staring at the reflection of the candles in my glass of water. The humiliation I had carried in with me was gone, replaced by something fierce and steady. They had tried to bury me under their standards, but the truth had risen instead. For the first time that night, I breathed deep and easy. And as Margaret's chair slid back into place, and her heels clicked against the polished floor, I knew the Hales were not the only ones who had fallen. Something inside me had fallen away too, something heavy that I had carried for years. The air shifted again, quieter now, like the echo after a storm. The Hales sat crumbling in their own house, their empire trembling on a single decision. And I sat beside the woman whose arrival had changed everything, knowing this night would mark the rest of our lives. I rose from the table slower than I meant to, my knees stiff from sitting in one place too long and my chest tight from holding back so many words. Margaret was already moving toward the foyer, her back straight, her heels clicking sharp against the wood. I followed at a distance, not wanting to drag the moment out, but before I could reach the vestibule, Emily slipped from her chair and hurried after me. "Dad!" she whispered, her hand brushing my arm. Her eyes were red, her cheeks flushed. She led me toward the quiet front hall where the noise of the dining room dulled into muffled clatter. The chandelier above the entry cast soft light, and for the first time all night we stood apart from the judgmental eyes and the forced smiles. She turned to face me, her voice shaking. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted it to go like this." I looked at her, at the daughter I had raised, the one who had laughed with grease on her nose when she was little, and I taught her how to change a spark plug. Her face now carried lines of worry too early for her age. I placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "It isn't your fault, sweetheart, none of it." Tears brimmed and she bit her lip. "I thought if I kept the peace, if I stayed quiet, maybe they'd soften. Maybe they'd learn to accept you. I didn't want to make things harder for you." I shook my head slowly. "Keeping the peace by staying quiet only gives people more room to be cruel. You can't shrink yourself to fit someone else's measure, not even for them." She dropped her gaze to the marble floor, her voice small. "But Nathan, I didn't know what to do. He's my husband, Dad." "And his family?" "They push and push until I feel like I'm disappearing." I felt a dull ache in my chest hearing her say it. "I know. I can see it every time I look at you in this house. They don't see you for who you are. They see you as someone to mold, someone to use as a bridge between their world and what they want from it." Her hands clenched into fists. "I hate that I let them treat you like this. I hate that I stood by while they said things I should have fought against." I pulled her into my arms. She shook against me, her tears warm on my shirt. "You are still my girl. Nothing they say changes that. Don't let them convince you that kindness is weakness. That's the lie they live by. And if you forget who you are, they win twice." She stepped back, wiping at her face with the edge of her sleeve. Her eyes glistened in the chandelier's glow. "What do I do, Dad? Tell me what to do." I hesitated, feeling the weight of what she was asking. She wasn't a child anymore. She had made her life with Nathan, chosen this family for better or worse. But she was still looking at me like she used to when she scraped her knee and waited for me to tell her how to stop the sting. "All I can tell you," I said, my voice low and steady, "is be yourself. Stand up when it matters. Don't let anyone take that from you. Not me, not Nathan, not his parents. You're better than this place. Don't let their bitterness change you." "Oh." She nodded, but I could see the war in her eyes. The pull between loyalty to her husband and the truth she felt in her bones. From the dining room I heard Charles's voice, raised but shaky, trying to fill the silence with empty words. Margaret was still in the foyer, speaking calmly to a guest who lingered, her presence anchoring the house like a storm held at bay. "Emily," Nathan called suddenly from the hall, his tone clipped, commanding. His footsteps echoed closer. She looked at me, panic flickering across her face. She was caught between two worlds, her hand half reaching for mine, half pulling away. I touched her cheek gently. "You don't have to answer him right away. You don't have to answer him at all. Remember that." The sound of Nathan's shoes grew louder on the polished floor. Emily's breath hitched. She gave me one last look, torn and trembling. Then his voice came again, sharper. "Emily." Her shoulders stiffened. She turned halfway toward him, halfway back to me. For a heartbeat she stood frozen under the chandelier's light, caught between her father's steady hand and her husband's pull. I didn't know which way she would turn. I only knew the choice was hers to make. And in that quiet vestibule, with the echo of Nathan's footsteps closing in, I prayed she would remember who she really was. I left the Hale house that night with the sound of voices chasing me out the door. Margaret was waiting near the steps, her purse in hand, her face calm in a way that made the chaos inside feel small. She looked at me and gave a slight nod, as if to say we had both survived something neither of us had asked for. When she asked if I wanted to get a bite to eat before heading home, I didn't hesitate. We drove in separate cars down Route 9, the night air cool and steady, the traffic thin. Her Jaguar glided smooth while my Toyota hummed along faithfully behind her. A few miles down the road she pulled into Miller's, a diner I knew well. The sign flickered but never went out. The kind of place where the booths had cracks in the red vinyl and the waitresses called you honey without thinking about it. Inside, the air smelled of coffee, fried onions, and pie crust. The bell above the door jingled as we walked in, and a few regulars looked up from their plates. No one cared about what we wore or where we came from. That alone felt like medicine after the marble halls of Greenbrier. We slid into a booth in the corner, the table worn smooth by decades of elbows and plates. Margaret set her purse beside her and gave me a look that carried more understanding than words. "Well," she said softly, "that was an evening." I let out a dry laugh. "That's one way to put it." A waitress came by with 2 menus, but Margaret waved her off with a smile. "2 coffees to start. And maybe 2 of your steak specials if the grill's still open." The woman nodded and walked off, and just like that we were no longer guests at a performance. We were just 2 people waiting for dinner. Margaret leaned back in the booth, her hands folded. "Do you know what struck me the most in that house tonight?" I shook my head. "The silence," she said. "So many people in that room knew what was happening was wrong, but not one of them spoke up until I pressed them. Not one." I stared into the steam rising from the coffee when it arrived. That's how they live. Image first, truth second. Emily tries to make it work, but I can see it eating at her. Margaret's eyes softened. "She has your spirit. I saw it in her when she defended you, even if she couldn't push all the way through she wanted to." The steaks came, sizzling on the plates, simple with mashed potatoes and beans on the side. I hadn't eaten since morning, and the first bite felt like grounding myself back into the world I understood. No crystal, no chandeliers, no hollow standards, just food, plain and honest. We ate slowly, talking in the pauses. Margaret told me how she had grown up in Worcester, her father a machinist, her mother a school secretary. She had worked her way through college, built her business from the ground up, made mistakes, and learned from them. Success hadn't erased where she came from, but it had shown her how easily people forget their roots once they taste power. I told her about Linda, about the garage I had worked at for decades, about Emily as a little girl handing me wrenches with her tiny fingers smudged in grease. The memories spilled out easier than I expected, and she listened without interruption, nodding, sometimes smiling, sometimes looking down with the kind of understanding that only comes from your own scars. "You know what money can't buy?" she asked after a while, setting down her fork. "What's that?" "Time, loyalty, true reputation. You can buy applause, you can buy people's silence, but you can't buy the way someone looks at you when you've done right by them. That's earned." Her words settled into me like stones into still water, spreading rings that touched every part of the night we had lived through. I sipped my coffee, the bitter warmth steadying me. Sometimes I think people like the Hales wouldn't recognize decency if it sat across the table from them. Margaret smiled, faint but real. "Then it's our job to keep showing it anyway." The diner around us buzzed with quiet life. A man at the counter laughed with the cook. A young couple split a milkshake in the booth by the window. The jukebox in the corner hummed with an old tune. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Margaret slid a small card across the table. Her handwriting was on the back, a number different from the one she had called me on before. "That's my personal line, not the office. If you ever want to talk or if you ever need something, call me." I held the card between my fingers, the weight of it more than paper. "I will." We lingered over the last of the coffee until the waitress brought the check. Margaret paid without a word, despite my protest, leaving a tip that made the waitress beam. As we stood to leave, I felt lighter than I had in years. Outside, the night air smelled of rain, though the sky was clear. Our cars sat side by side under the glow of the flickering diner sign. Margaret looked at me, her face calm but her eyes bright. "Sometimes the right people show up in the most ordinary places," she said. I nodded, slipping the card into my wallet beside a photo of Linda and Emily. "Sometimes they do." We said goodnight, and as I drove away in my old Toyota, the road stretched ahead not as a burden but as a promise. In the weeks that followed, I began to see how one night could echo far beyond a single house. At first it was small things. A neighbor waved at me when I was out front working on my truck, a little longer than usual, like he had heard something but wasn't sure if he should mention it. At the grocery store, a woman I barely knew from church stopped me in the bread aisle and said she had read something in the local paper about Lawson Capital pulling out of the Hale Development Project. She didn't say my name, but she looked at me like she knew I was part of it. A few days later, I saw the headline myself. It was tucked into the business section of the community paper. Lawson Capital declines Hale Project, citing value misalignment. That phrase made me smile to myself. I knew exactly what those words meant. It wasn't about numbers, it was about character. The article was short, maybe 3 paragraphs, but it was enough to stir whispers. At the diner where I sometimes grabbed lunch, the cook leaned across the counter and asked, "Is it true you were at that party? The one with Margaret Lawson?" I just nodded and took a sip of coffee. He grinned. "Heard you made quite an impression." I didn't answer, but inside I felt something loosen, like the years of carrying their judgment were finally breaking apart. The Hales weren't doing so well. News traveled quick in a town like ours. A contractor who worked with them mentioned delays on a project, said the bank was asking tougher questions now. At the country club, someone told me attendance at Veronica's luncheons had thinned. People with money don't like to stand too close to someone whose reputation is slipping. It rubs off. Meanwhile, my days looked the same on the surface. I fixed a neighbor's pickup when the starter gave out. I patched a leaky faucet in the apartment downstairs. I sat on my porch in the evenings with a cold drink, the same porch where Linda and I used to watch Emily ride her bike around the block. But people began to greet me with more warmth, more recognition, as if word had spread that something important had happened and I had been at the center of it. Emily came by one Sunday afternoon, just the two of us. She sat on the porch steps and stared at her hands. "Things are tense," she admitted. "Nathan is furious about what happened. His parents are worse. They've been blaming me, saying I let you embarrass them." I sighed. "Sweetheart, you didn't let anything happen. They embarrassed themselves. You stood up for me when it mattered." She looked at me with wet eyes. "I wish I had done more." I shook my head. "You did enough. You spoke the truth in a house built on lies. That's more than most people ever do." She leaned against me then, just like she used to as a little girl, her head on my shoulder. For a moment it felt like the years had folded back. I held on to that feeling, because I knew she would need it for strength in the days ahead. Margaret called once or twice during those weeks, nothing heavy. She asked how I was, told me about a small community fund she was starting, asked if I'd be interested in helping her look over some local projects. I said yes without hesitation. Talking with her was like stepping into fresh air after being trapped in a stale room. The whispers about the Hales only grew. At the hardware store, I overheard 2 men talking about how Charles had practically begged a new bank for financing. At church, a woman whispered to her friend that Veronica had been left off the guest list for a charity gala. The fall was slow but steady, like cracks spreading in glass. Through it all, I kept my routine. I cooked simple meals. I read the paper in the morning. I worked with my hands when anyone asked for help. But I carried myself differently. Not taller, exactly, but steadier. The humiliation I had swallowed for years no longer had the same power. I had faced them, and the truth had spoken louder than their money. One evening, as I was closing up the garage, a text buzzed on my phone. It was from Emily. "Can we meet?" Without Nathan. Just 6 words, but they carried a weight that made me set down my wrench and lean against the wall for a long time. The ripples were still moving, reaching further each day, and I knew the next wave was already on its way. The porch light hummed faintly as it always did, casting a soft yellow circle across the wooden steps. I sat there one evening with the gift I had given Veronica resting in my hands. The silver frame still carried the faintest smudge from when she had taken it between 2 fingers as though it might stain her. She hadn't even looked at it that night, just set it aside like it was nothing. I had taken it back when no one was paying attention. Maybe out of pride. Maybe because I couldn't stand to see something I chose for her tossed into a corner. Now the frame sat on my lap with a different picture inside. Emily at 9 years old, her hair wild from the wind, a streak of grease across her cheek, standing beside me next to the go-kart we had built together from scrap. She was grinning wide, holding a wrench bigger than her arm. I traced the edge of the photo with my thumb, feeling that moment come back as clear as if it were yesterday. Linda's voice stirred in my mind. She had been the one to take that picture, standing back with the old Polaroid, laughing at how serious Emily had looked until the shutter clicked. I could almost hear her saying what she always said when I doubted myself. "You've got nothing to prove but who you are, Frank." The neighborhood was quiet, except for the crickets. A car passed at the far end of the street, its headlights sweeping briefly across the porch, and then everything was still again. I leaned back in the chair, holding the frame against my chest, and let myself speak into the empty air. Did I do right, Linda? Did I stand tall enough? Did I give Emily something to hold on to? The words sounded strange in the silence, but I knew she would have answered if she were there. She had always believed in dignity, in kindness, even when it cost us. I remembered the way she used to scold me gently when I got worked up over money or pride. "Better to go to bed with an empty pocket than an empty soul," she would say. I closed my eyes and listened for her in the hum of the porch light, in the night air. Maybe I was only hearing my own heart, but I felt her answer just the same. "Yes, you did right." My phone buzzed on the table beside me, startling me. A voicemail. I pressed play and heard Margaret's voice. Calm, steady, a little softer than usual. "Frank, this isn't business. I'm putting together a small community fund, nothing flashy, just something real. I'd like your eyes on it. You understand what's needed and what isn't. Call me when you're ready." I sat with the phone in my hand, the glow of the screen fading. Her words carried weight, not just because she wanted my help, but because she trusted me to see what was real. That was worth more than any investment she had pulled from the Hales. Then another sound came, a vibration against the wood. A text from Emily. "Can we meet? Just us, please." I stared at the two messages, side by side in my mind like two doors opening at once. One was a daughter reaching for her father, torn between loyalty and truth. The other was a woman offering a new kind of companionship, a chance to matter in ways I hadn't felt since Linda was alive. The porch light flickered once, then steadied. I set the phone down and looked again at the photo in the frame. Emily's smile at 9, fearless, messy, unashamed. Linda's laughter echoing faintly in my memory. "Be yourself," I whispered, repeating the words I had told Emily only nights ago. That's all any of us can do. The house was still, but the air felt charged, like something was shifting just beyond my reach. I leaned back in the chair, the frame warm in my hands, and let the night hold me. Somewhere between the message from my daughter and the voice of another widow asking for my counsel, I felt the weight of choice settling on my shoulders. And though the world outside was dark, the light on the porch burned steady, guiding me toward whatever came next. The morning light came in thin and pale across the kitchen table, the kind that makes everything look sharper than at Island. The paper sat folded to the side, untouched, the coffee in my cup already cooling. In front of me were 2 envelopes, one thick, printed on expensive paper, the other plain and handwritten with my name on it in blue ink. I picked up the heavy one first, the Hale name embossed in gold at the corner, the kind of letter that announces itself before you even open it. I slid a finger under the flap and pulled out the folded pages. The language was stiff, carefully chosen, the kind of words lawyers put together when they want to smooth over damage without admitting to it. Clarification, they called it. A miscommunication, they wrote. And then, buried in the middle, a line that struck like a stone. They wanted me to provide a statement, something simple, saying that no insult had been intended, that I had not felt excluded. A polite rewrite of the truth. My hands tightened around the page until the paper crinkled. I read the words again, slower this time, hearing the desperation beneath them. They weren't really asking me. They were trying to buy back what had been lost, to patch a reputation cracked wide open. They wanted me to lend them my dignity, to cover their shame. I set the letter down and reached for the second envelope. The paper was ordinary, a little uneven at the edges, the ink pressed heavy from a hand that didn't rush. Margaret's handwriting. I unfolded it and read slowly. Frank, no rush. Coffee Thursday? I'd like to hear more of your stories. Bring whatever pictures you want. There's no agenda, just time. You've got more to teach me than any boardroom ever did. The words sat in me like warm bread. No demand, no polish, no lawyer's filter. Just an invitation. I placed both letters side by side on the table. The morning sun crept across them, catching the gold on the hail letter, softening the blue ink on Margaret's note. I stared until the lines blurred. One represented the world that had tried to break me down for years, still clawing for control. The other was a door open to something new, not grand, not loud, but real. My phone buzzed against the wood. Emily's name lit up the screen. A message. Dad, can we talk today? I need you. I closed my eyes for a long moment, breathing deep. My daughter's voice was in those words. The same girl who once held a wrench bigger than her arm. The same girl who now stood between two families, pulling her in opposite directions. Footsteps sounded outside on the porch. Slow, steady, moving closer. I turned my head toward the window. A shadow passed across the glass, then paused. Someone was at my door. The letters still lay on the table, one heavy with lies, the other light with truth. My phone buzzed again, Emily calling this time, her name glowing steady. I stood, my chair scraping softly against the floor. My hand brushed across the photo frame that sat in the middle of the table, the one with Emily at 9 years old grinning at the go-kart. Linda's voice echoed in me, the same words I had heard again and again. You've got nothing to prove but who you are. The knock came, firm but not hurried. I looked once more at the two letters, then at my phone, then at the door. My hand reached out, not yet choosing, only ready. The porch light from last night had burned out, but the sun was strong now, pouring through the window, cutting across the table in gold. I wrapped my fingers around the knob and pulled the door open. What waited on the other side, I didn't yet know. That night at Greenbrier changed everything. The people who had mocked me were left staring at the wreckage of their own pride, while the woman I had helped on the highway reminded everyone what real worth looks like. My daughter saw her father stand tall, and I walked away with my dignity intact. Maybe life doesn't hand us riches or marble floors, but it gives us choices to be kind, to stand for truth, to never sell our character. What about you? Have you ever been judged unfairly and later seen the truth win out? Share your story below.